Good afternoon. Miss Sinkler implied that there may be some of you here for the first time. And if so, I'm afraid you're going to have a very difficult time of it today, because our students have been given a program of work which is the most difficult program, a large program, a heavy program, and this work will have to be encompassed by May. The program they are expected to study and be able to understand and demonstrate consists of all of the classwork that has been given in 1959. And this is indeed a tremendous program. When we started the night before last, I realized afterward that I had lost sight of the fact that it was supposed to be a lecture. And it was really a continuation of our classwork. And last night was even more so. And I'm sorry to say to you who are here for the first time that this afternoon it will be even more so. And so it may be very difficult for you to grasp or even to bear with me, and I will apologize in advance and say that if you feel any interest at all, the best way to catch up will be to start the study of the art of meditation and practicing the presence, and then begin from there to come up to date where we are. I feel it necessary to continue what we started last night. You will remember that I said that our progress is delayed because we still have, consciously or unconsciously in our mind, previous teachings of a religious nature or metaphysical nature which make it impossible for us to grasp these specific principles which constitute our work. Today I would like to call your attention to one of the mistakes still made by our students, or by many of them, not willingly and not consciously, but without their realizing that they are blocking their own spiritual progress and their own demonstration of harmony. And of course, no one intentionally would block their spiritual progress or their demonstration of harmony. And so, if this is called to your attention, it will give you an opportunity to overcome, at least in a measure, some of these stumbling blocks to progress. In healing work, spiritual healing work, you start with God as the true identity and individuality of everyone, whether they are saint or sinner, whether they're sick or well, whether they're rich or poor, You ignore the appearances. You do not judge by appearances. You judge righteous judgment. You judge spiritual judgment. And this means that you close your eyes to the appearances. You ignore the fact that this one is a saint or this one is a sinner. This one is sick and this one is well. This one is rich and this one is poor. And you start with your realization of God as constituting the nature of individual man. God as constituting the nature of individual being. In other words, God is the mind of you, the soul, the spirit, and even your body is the temple of the living God. And so it is that God constitutes all there is of you. This isn't too difficult. The difficulty comes in realizing that this is the truth about the man or woman in prison, or the man and woman who ought to be there. This is the truth about the person dying of some terrible disease. This is the truth of the poverty-stricken. God constitutes individual you and me. God constitutes all there is to man, woman, child, animal, vegetable, and mineral. God is the essence and the source and the activity, and God is the law unto all being. Of course, if you open your eyes and look around at man whose breath is in his nostril, you'll find a contradiction of this. But that will be because you are judging by appearances instead of judging righteous judgment, spiritual judgment. Now, it isn't with our eyes or ears, nor by our sense of smell, that we know that man is spiritual and perfect. It is by an inner spiritual cognition, an inner spiritual discernment. The Master referred to this: do you have eyes and do not see? Do you have ears and do not hear? Meaning, do you not have this inner capacity for seeing and understanding? Of course, he knew that the people could see physically and hear physically, and so what he was concerned with, do you not have an inner vision, a spiritual vision, so that you can comprehend that which the eyes never see, that which the ears never hear? In other words, can you not feel within yourself that each one of us is an offspring of God, that God actually is your Father and my Father? Can you not somewhere within your own being feel that God is equally your Father and my Father, that God is equally the Father of the saint and the sinner, the lost and the found? Until you can have such a feeling, you have not developed your spiritual awareness. You are looking out with your eyes and judging from the standpoint of what you see or hear or smell. Now, seeing, hearing, and smelling are just physical senses, and they have nothing to do with the kingdom of God. Therefore, you can never see or hear or smell the kingdom of God or anyone in it. You can only discern them by an inner feeling, an inner awareness. And when this comes to you, you will recognize that since God is no respecter of persons, since God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, that actually God is the very life of all being. God is the very soul of all being. The Spirit, the perfection and the harmony and the divine grace and the law of all being. Now, this is a major, a foundational principle in this message of the infinite way. Without it, you can neither enter the spiritual path of living nor enjoy the experience of spiritual healing. There is no way to live spiritually until you have come to see this point, because on no other basis can you love your neighbor as yourself. Let us not be ridiculous in our religious life. Let us not believe that we can love the thief, the sensualist, the immoral, the degraded. Let us not believe for a minute that we can actually love these tyrants of the economic or political world. Let us not be naive. It is an impossibility to love those who deal unjustly with the world. But if we have one touch of this Spirit of God, we can look right through that appearance and say with the Master, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. We know that they are offspring of God. We know that thou art the life and being. They haven't yet awakened to it. And therefore, we can love that which they truly are. We can love the image and likeness of God. We can love our neighbor, whom we know to be the offspring of God. And we can forgive the appearance. We can forgive the appearance because we know man as he is in truth, even if he does not yet know himself. Then, when you open your eyes, you won't find it difficult to love even that sinner down the street, because you will have this feeling of compassion, this sense of, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. They do not realize their true identity. They do not realize that full satisfaction is to be found in God. Full prosperity is to be found in God. Peace is to be found in God. Now, once you have embraced this as a principle, you can never again indulge your old metaphysical modes of practice that tries to uncover error in somebody, or that tells somebody you ought to be more loving, or you ought to be more generous, or you ought to be more thoughtful, or you ought to be this, or you ought to be that. You can't indulge the old metaphysical practice of trying to change a human being in order to make them a better human being, because now you have seen through the disguise, you have seen through the mask of personality and discerned the reality, and your practice consists of holding fast to the spiritual reality of their identity, not finding fault with them, not judging, criticizing, condemning, moralizing, not saying, why don't you love your mother-in-law better than you do, or why aren't you nicer to your next-door neighbor, or why don't you attend church more regularly, but never, never, once you have acknowledged the spiritual identity of individual being, never again can you metaphysically work from the standpoint of correcting the error in your patient or your student. You have to maintain rigidly your spiritual center. You have to maintain rigidly, in spite of all appearances, this is the Christ of God. This is true identity. This is immortality, and all that is mortal, even if it were good mortal, is illusion. All that is mortal is unreal, is no part of God's kingdom, even when it's honest or moral. You have to look through humanity, through mortality, to immortality. Now this leads to a mode of healing which makes most healing work simple. It takes the labor out of healing work. It removes most of the difficulties and brings forth healings quickly. It doesn't necessarily mean that every case is healed quickly. It doesn't mean that every case is healed easily, but it does mean that on the whole you can expect your healing ministry to be more successful and not merely change the health of your patient or student from ill health to good health, but actually you open their spiritual center by what I now say to you. The moment that you are confronted with a problem, the moment that anyone calls you, writes you, asks you for a help on any problem, be sure and be quick. Impersonalize that error that is presenting itself to you instantly. Do not connect it with that individual, but rather disconnect it instantly by realizing, since God constitutes individual being, this thing that is being presented to me is not of man, but of the carnal mind, or mortal mind, or devil, whatever you like. Impersonalize it instantly, but quickly. Do not allow the error or the person presenting the error to rest in your thought for 1 minute. In other words, you must never take the name of your patient into your treatment. You must never take the name of the disease into your treatment. You must never take the nature of the claim into your treatment. Why? Because God constitutes the infinite individuality of the one who has asked for help, and the reason they are asking for help is that momentarily they have lost sight of their true identity. But that's no excuse for you to lose sight of their true identity and immediately start to, well, now let's see what we can do for you. You can't do anything for you. You are infinite individuality already. Let us see what we can do to the appearance that has been presented to you, to the claim that has been presented to you, to the suggestion that has been presented to you of a selfhood apart from God, of an identity apart from God. And the first thing you can do is to close your eyes to the name or identity or face or form or figure of the one who has asked for help. Instantly blot them out, and the disease or the claim or the unemployment or the lack or the sin, block that out, and instantly realizing God constitutes all being, and this that is being presented to me is a picture of mortality. The very moment you have done that, if you have done it promptly, if you've done it clearly, if there's no fuzziness in your thought, if you know this principle so thoroughly that you're doing it just with that degree of realization, you've already separated it from the patient, and you should, in 70 or 80% of the cases, have an instantaneous healing or a very quick one. If so be you have instantly recognized God constitutes all being, God is the substance of all form, God is the law unto all identity, and this that is being presented to me, whether it's male, female, or child, whether it's animal, vegetable, or mineral, this is a picture of mortality. You might have said, they have only the arm of flesh. In other words, this is nothing. This is a picture without substance. In our writings, we refer to the fact that actually all the world is suffering from is hypnotism, a universal hypnotic force or power that presents itself to us as erroneous pictures. Well, of course, these pictures seem very real to us if we look at them, and very real if we start feeling them. Nevertheless, as you follow this mode of practice, you will find that the pictures disappear. And then you will see that they were exactly that. They were hypnotic pictures. A hypnotist can make you see snakes, but he can't make snakes. He can make you see pink elephants, but he can't make pink elephants. He can make you see a burning building, but he can't create a burning building. All he can create is a substanceless image without form or reality or law. And so you will learn that every evil that besets you or me or our friends as individuals is a substanceless appearance without form, without law, and even without cause, because it has no entity and no identity. You can only prove this by a rigid adherence to this principle. In other words, you dare not come down from the estate of realizing God constituting individual being to saying, well, now will you just read 20 pages while I do some work? Because you have acknowledged the whole mesmeric picture. You cannot come down from your high estate and say, now, why don't you be more patient with your husband or with your wife or with your child? You have embraced the whole of the mesmeric picture, and it is the blind leading the blind. When you embark upon the task of helping anyone else spiritually, you must yourself be so free of this world that you are no longer judging after appearances. You are no longer trying to be a good psychologist, making a bad human into a good one, or an unloving one into a loving one. You are no longer operating on the mental side of good and evil. You yourself have been completely removed from that world. You do not live in that world of wanting bad humans to be good or wanting sick humans to be well. You yourself have removed yourself to the place where you now recognize God. God, in my inner vision, I see God. I see God coming to me as my neighbor. I see God as the real identity of my enemy. I see God as the very heart and soul of the sinner, of the diseased, the deformed. I see God as the life and essence and soul of all being. Therefore, I never again can enter the world of mesmerism. I cannot permit myself to be mesmerized by appearances. And so regardless of what appearances I see, I look through them to reality. Now, our entire healing ministry in the infinite way consists of the ability to live in the awareness of spiritual identity, never trying to make mortality immortal, never trying to make dishonesty honest or immorality moral, never trying to make a bad human good or a sick human well, always living in the realization of God constituting all being, God the substance of all form, God the only lawgiver. And then acknowledging all mortal appearances as being just that, mortality, the arm of flesh or the mesmeric picture, and then dropping it quickly. The reason I speak of this perhaps so forcibly is that I still get letters from students and phone calls saying, will you help me get rid of the illusion? But you see, this is so incorrect. Once you know it's an illusion, you've got nothing to get rid of. I don't like to bore you by repeating the same illustrations over and over again, but when you have a good one, you have to ride it to death. If you were driving across the desert for the first time and you saw a flood of water on the road ahead of you, you stopped your car and ran to the nearest telephone booth and said, please give me help, the road is covered with water. You'd be a bad practitioner if you started running for buckets to take the water from the road. No, you know that this is an illusion. You know that this is a false image created by the physical senses. And so you would just say to your friend, don't worry, that's not water. That's a mirage that looks like water. And then your friend would probably look back on that road intently, until finally they too saw that it was mirage. They breathed a sigh of relief and drove on. But what would you think of them if they phoned again and said, yes, it's an illusion, but help me get rid of the illusion? When your heart or your soul or your mind, whichever it is that grasps this, that every appearance is mortality, something that is to be put off because of its unreality, that it is only a mesmeric picture, don't do any more work about it and don't give more treatment about it. Your treatment has ended when you have impersonalized the error by getting it out here and then nothingized it by realizing the arm of flesh or nothingness. A mesmeric picture without substance, without law. You will find that your entire world changes the minute you are no longer looking at human beings as human beings. The very moment that you have perceived in your innermost being that God is really the parent of all of us, and that we are offspring of God, and that we're constituted of God qualities regardless of what kind of mask we're wearing on the outside. Now remember, because of our birth, home environment, school environment, or world experience, As humans, we all wear different masks. Some of us have the mask of hate, and some the mask of fear, some the mask of doubt, some the mask of sin, some the mask of disease. But all of these are masks that have been superimposed upon the being that was born. We weren't born in sin. We were just born innocent babes. And everything else we've acquired. Now, all of these errors of the world have been superimposed upon us. And as we can wash the dirt off of our face, we can wash all mortality out of our being by the recognition of our true identity, and then not hating or fearing this mortality, which is only a dream at best. Let me say it this way, that what I've said to you isn't difficult, but you can make it difficult. It isn't difficult if you take what I have said and keep it locked up inside of you. If you will make an agreement with yourself that you will not say this to anyone, that you will not tell it to anyone, that you will not try to sell it to anyone. In other words, what you know about this world, you know and keep locked up within you, and it bears fruitage. Whereas if you say it to a person, they will bounce it right back at you. And not only they can't accept it, but pretty soon they'll have you doubting it. One thing about the practice of this message in the infinite way, it may consist of an awful lot of words in teaching it, but it consists of very few words in living it. In other words, yea, yea, and nay, nay is being quite conversational. When asked for help, the wisest thing is to say, leave it with me, or let me take care of it, and nothing further. I find very few occasions to say any more than that to a patient, or to write any more than that when they ask for help. It is when we are past the place of healing and they have indicated their interest in learning the principle that I can find lots of words, loads of words, as most of you already know. Words is the mostest thing I've got. But that's only in teaching. It isn't in living. When I am traveling, and I'm traveling tens of thousands of miles at every stretch, I say very, very little. Nothing to those I meet, except they are students. Nothing to those I meet on the plane or in the train or in the hotel. Nothing. Nothing. And even my wife and I, traveling together all of the time, have very little to say about truth. We both read it and we both meditate about it, but in words we have very, very little to say. We find very little to say. Because what is there to say after you have known this? There's nothing left to say. It's something you live within your own being, and when you say it, you take the risk of violating Mr. Emerson. What you are shrieks so loudly I cannot hear what you say. The more truth you talk, the less anyone is going to believe you. The more cliches you indulge, the more you show your ignorance. Because to really know this truth, to understand it, means you have it incorporated in your being, and by that, the world feels it. It can't hear what you say because it can't take it in, but it can feel what you are. And so it is that in living the infinite way, you find yourself at a loss for words. You can't describe what it is. You can't tell anyone what it is because they have no way of receiving it. But somehow, by your not saying anything about it, and by your inwardly, silently looking on them and realizing the grace of God constitutes them, they feel an attraction to you, and very often for that for which you stand. But I have noticed it in my travels that this is only true of those who keep the finger on the lips on the subject of truth. I can be induced to talk about politics very quickly, but not about truth. Seems to me truth is something too sacred for conversation or discussion, and besides, who could understand it anyhow? Except the student. And the student knows it and doesn't have to be talked to. And there you are. It leaves you almost no reason for ever talking truth unless someone comes in sincerity, in earnestness, to ask about it for enlightenment. Then, of course, the words begin to flow. It used to be that we were taught to heal by teaching. I can't agree with that. Not even a little bit. Because the moment I voice a truth, it isn't true. For instance, supposing I say, you are spiritual. And now you just remember what you humanly are and see how you like that being called spiritual. It arouses an antagonism in you because you know it isn't true. You can think of all the ugly thoughts that go through your mind, whether they're of hate or resentment or jealousy or sensuality or envy, and you say to yourself, oh, he's not talking about me. No. It's not nice to be called spiritual because we know how far we are from real spirituality, and we just don't like to be reminded of it. Therefore, to say, you are spiritual, you are perfect, you are God's perfect child, no, I can't quite go along with that. When a person is ill, they are not looking for cliches, and they're not looking for words of truth. They're looking for freedom. They're looking for release. And the thing to do is to retire into the center of your own being and commune with God until you reach that point of agreement within yourself, and then they feel their release. By that time then they come, what is this principle? How does that happen? Can I go and do likewise? Then comes the point of instruction, and then we have loads of words. It is the same way some of the great problems of earth today are these human relationship problems inside the home or inside of business or inside of government. It's all a matter, or internationally, it's all a matter of relationships. But now, just to go home and tell somebody to be loving, or to tell somebody to be forgiving, or to tell, well, you know, they can't be, or they would have been before they came to you. That is something I've learned in this life, that nobody can be other than what they are, until something has been introduced into their consciousness that wipes out what they were and makes them something different. But saying to a person, oh, now you go home and be more loving, and you be more forgiving, you be more patient. It doesn't work because they can't be, and very often you should be saying it to the other party. It isn't always the one who's doing the complaining that has the complaint. And so it is that from the standpoint of this unfoldment that I have witnessed, I say when problems are brought to me of a discordant nature in the home or in the business or in the different teacher-scholar relationships, I merely say, let me take hold of it and you relax. Oh yes, I might and very often do say, take the book Practicing the Presence and turn to the chapter Love Thy Neighbor, because there are principles in there which are worthwhile knowing. Since this book is out, The Art of Spiritual Healing, I have added to that the chapter Relationship of Oneness. Now anyone at all, a student especially, who is interested in working out their own human relationships on a spiritual basis, or is interested in helping others work out theirs, can do no better than to take those two chapters for study, because they embrace the principles which, when you are giving help, you have to take into your silent meditation. In other words, when I am asked for help on these relationships and I sit down to meditate, I immediately begin to remember God is the only selfhood. Therefore, we don't have two people to this relationship. We have only one. God, infinite selfhood, appearing as two, but still only one. God within itself, even when appearing infinitely, has no disagreement with itself, or it would soon be tearing itself to pieces. There'd be no God left. God is immortal and eternal, therefore God has within itself no disagreement. God is infinite selfhood, your selfhood and mine, therefore there are not two of us, therefore there can't be disagreement. There cannot be interests opposed to each other, for the only interest there is the interest of God expressing itself. And so I take these principles into my meditation until they come alive in me and I feel the truth of them. Then those whom I am helping will write or telephone or telegraph and say, harmony is restored, all is well. I haven't said a word to them. I have merely gone into the silence with the truth of being, and because it was the truth of being and they had reached out for it, they received it. Had I said this to them openly, verbally, orally, or in writing, it would have brought back, oh yes, I know all that already. And you see, the whole treatment would have been lost, the whole truth would have been lost, nothing would have been gained. No, I remember many, many years ago, I'd been in the practice a few years, and one day I had something wrong with me that was awfully painful, and so I asked someone for help, and the first thing they started was to give me a lesson in metaphysics. I said, please, I know all those things, and if they were true, I wouldn't be asking you for help, or if you knew they were true, I'd already have my freedom. So why not forget about telling me this and make them true within yourself, and I'll get the help. And I've never forgotten that. It's absolutely true. When you want help, you don't want words. And you don't want cliches, and you don't want absolute truth. All you want is freedom. When you want words, when you want principles, it's when you are studying and learning and wanting to go and do likewise. And so it is. I said years ago to students, when you are called upon for help, be as loving to your human patients as you would be to your dogs and cats. You don't ask them to go and read 20 pages or to be more loving or to go to church. Well, don't ask the human patients. just sit and know the truth, and they will find their freedom. So I say to you, first, know the truth, but be sure you know it, and if you are following the infinite way, be sure that you know the infinite way truth. And that means do not go searching around in the mind or consciousness of your patient to uncover error. Do not sit in judgment and try to tell them what to do in order to get their healing. Do not take the attitude that this is a human being that wants improvement. Take the attitude that this is mortality appearing that must now be clothed in immortality by your awareness of the truth, not theirs. If they could do it for themselves, they wouldn't have come to you. And if at this moment they can't do it, they may be able to do it for 20 other people, and yet at a given moment cannot do it for themselves. So be merciful. And when they ask for help, turn away from the appearance, even the human appearance, go within yourself and realize God as individual identity, and take this appearance, regardless of its name or nature, and call it what it is: mortality, the carnal mind, mortal mind, nothingness, claiming to be something without the law of God. For the law of God does not uphold mortality. In fact, there is no law of God in the mortal scene, for the mortal cannot be under the law of God. The mortal cannot please God. The mortal cannot be under the law of God. And therefore you have every right to say of mortality, you have no mother or father. Therefore you are a nothingness, never created, uncreated, nothingize it. And this is the end of your treatment. Should your patient not receive the full benefit of that treatment and call later for help, you may again have to return to that inner stillness and realize truth. You may have to do that 10 times, 20 times, or 100 times, because you do not know always what it is that is blocking the demonstration of harmony. Now, here again, we come to one of the discoveries made in this infinite way practice. There are still people, not only in the metaphysical world, but also in the infinite way world, who are expecting a demonstration of health or of supply or of companionship or of happiness. And of course, if they are, they've blocked their own demonstration so far as we are concerned, because we can't help them to such demonstrations. We don't claim to. The books state definitely that the entire practice of the infinite way is to bring to an individual the consciousness of God's presence. And that's the only demonstration we can make for anyone, is the realization of God's presence. Now, if in spite of all this, the patient or student isn't interested in the demonstration of God's presence, but is still interested in demonstrating supply or companionship or abundance, well, they've just kept themselves outside of the principle, and you may keep treating for a week or a month before you break down that resistance, and all of a sudden they say, well, supposing I don't get these things, let me at least know God. Then you'll know your treatment has at last taken effect, and now the healing will come quickly. Now, why do we have such a principle in the infinite way? For this reason. In my work it was revealed that God is infinite. If God is infinite, there can be nothing outside of infinity. So if there is such a thing as health or supply, or companionship or happiness, it must be included in God. Then the thing to do is get God. When you've got God, then you've got everything that's included in God, which is health and harmony and wholeness and companionship and prosperity and all that goes with it. Now, to think of wanting in a spiritual life, to think of wanting something separate and apart from God seems almost sacrilegious to me. To want supply or to want companionship without God, that kind of gives me shivers. Because if you had them, you might be like the man with $1 billion that had to live on milk and crackers. The $1 billion isn't very good. It doesn't go very far. You may have all of this world, but if you haven't God, you've got nothing, and you'll soon find it out. Many have thought that if they just had enough money, or enough fame, or enough position, that would satisfy them, and then when they had it, found that they had a bag of dust. No one has ever wanted God and gotten it and been disappointed. Because to attain God, one attains all that is included in God. And therefore, to seek anything at all separate and apart from God is almost like leaving God out of one's world, and that's unthinkable in a spiritual life. Then there is a second point that was revealed in the work, and that is this. God is not our servant. We have no right to go to God and ask God to go out and get something for us. Whether it's supply or whether it's companionship or whether it's safety or security, we have no right whatsoever to set ourselves up in a position of, now God, I'm coming to you for this. Children do it to their parents, but God isn't a human parent. And if God is a father, it is not in any human sense. We have no right whatsoever to think of God as being something obedient to us or subject to our will or subject to our desires. We must entertain a higher concept of God than that. We must first of all begin with ourselves and realize that since God is the creative principle of this universe, that we must be subject unto God. We must be subject unto the will of God, unto the love of God. And certainly, to acknowledge God as the intelligence of this universe would never permit us to tell God what we need. Therefore, to go to God as if God were going out here to get something for us is outside the realm of truth, outside the realm of possibility. When Moses was faced with a lack of food in the desert, I'm sure that he couldn't have prayed to God for food because there wasn't any possibility of getting any out there in the desert. It certainly wasn't growing there, and he didn't expect to grow it in an hour. I am absolutely certain that all that Moses could have done was drop his shoulders with a lack of responsibility and say, God, we are thy children, and thy grace is our sufficiency. And then he must have been surprised as all get out to see the manna falling from the sky. Never could he have dreamed that a demonstration could come about in that way, nor could he have prayed for it. And he couldn't have prayed for food, because to believe that food could come there would be fantastic. So with us. Don't block your own demonstration by trying to make an impossible demonstration of getting food in the desert. When you go to God, go in the realization that whether you're in a desert or in the ocean or beneath it or above it, you're in God's grace. And be satisfied that God's grace, if it is necessary, will make manna fall from the sky, or it'll provide a cloud by day and a pillar. Do you imagine that Moses really prayed for a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night? No, nobody had thought up such a thing up to that time, so he couldn't have thought of it. The only thing he could pray for, God, we are thy children. Envelop us. Thy grace is our sufficiency. And then God's grace came forth as a pillar of a cloud by day and fire by night. We must not set ourselves up as knowing more than God, or even as much as God. Nor must we outline what our demonstration shall be tomorrow by what somebody else's was yesterday. Because God's grace can appear to us in a way that it has never appeared to anyone else before, and it may even set a precedent for all the future. The only sad thing is that somebody else will be looking for a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night and praying for it. And of course that may not be necessary here at State and Madison. No, our demonstration is the realization that we are children of God and that God's grace is our sufficiency. Let it appear as companionship, if that's what is meant for us. Let it appear as aloneness, if that is what is meant for us at any given period. I'm sure that there are just as many periods of our life when aloneness is a spiritual demonstration as when companionship is a spirit. I am certain from my experience that there are periods of life when lack is as much a part of a spiritual demonstration as abundance. I'm absolutely convinced that it was the hand of God that threw Joseph into a pit and that sold him into slavery and then put him into prison for 2 years. And if that sounds harsh, just remember he ended up being the second man to the king. Why did he have to take such a roundabout way and suffer all that? Not because of God, but because of his opacity to God. Because he couldn't see God's plan, and probably he bucked it at every side. Oh, Father, let me stay with my father, who's a nice rich man and powerful in Egypt. Oh, Father, let me stay where I have a nice cloak. So God had to take him by the neck and throw him into a pit. And because he wasn't wise enough to get up out of it and travel, he had to be sold into slavery. So it is, I'm convinced, that we sometimes have to go through the experiences that we have, not because God says you ought to be poor or you ought to be in pain, only because we aren't sufficiently aware of God to say, thy will be done, and then when it becomes evident, get up and do it. It is because we're still looking for the demonstration to come in the way that it came to Smith, Jones, and Brown, or the way it's reported in the Bible, or the way it happened to Jesus, John, or Paul, instead of saying, God, thy grace is my sufficiency in whatever form it may come now. Well, those of you who are here for the first time, I know you've accepted my apology, and if you have heard anything of interest, begin with the simpler books and work up. And those of you who are already students of the infinite way, Please believe me when I say to you that unless you practice these specific principles until they are as clear-cut as the way they came forth today, until you know them that accurately and can say, God constitutes all being, this is the picture of mortality, out with you. You can only demonstrate it when you arrive at that point, and you can only arrive at that point by your own study and practice. You can be led to water, but nobody can make you drink. Thank you until tomorrow evening. Thank you.